What's up, metal and heavy music fans? This is Flight of Icarus with MetalTrenches.com. If you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button because there are plenty more videos for you to enjoy on the channel. I had so much fun doing my new metal ranking tier list that I thought I'd do another one. As many of you know, I'm a big metalcore fan, and I don't want to waste too much time on the intro here, but I did want to say I want to focus on sort of what I consider to be the golden age of metalcore, which is kind of like 1998-99 to about 2004 in my respects. So the bands I'm going to be talking about all sort of fall within that range. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, that's what we're looking at here. There are some bands included on here that some people are like, well, they're not really metalcore, or there are bands missing that I may have left out. It's just going to be that way. These are the bands that I was the most familiar with and spent the most time with, and tried to include as many of them as I can. It was tough, too, because there's bands that are sort of more like mathcore, like Dillinger Escape Plan, but by the time I included Converge, I was like, well, how can I have Converge without having Dillinger Escape Plan? And then how can I have Norma Jeane without having Botch? So it's complicated, and it may be a little bit messy, but we're gonna forge through it here. So let's just jump right into it here. Start off with a big one. Between the Buried and Me, no contest. These guys have to be S tier. They really haven't made a bad album. I'd say The Great Misdirect was kind of meh, but that's the worst they've done. And if that's the worst you can do, then that's saying something pretty good about your band, because it was still fine. It wasn't bad. And then they've just innovated. From the very beginning, they were doing their own thing, new and exciting stuff, and continue to do that to this day. Obviously, not everybody is a fan of the direction they've gone, but I've been quite pleased. They're just one of the top bands that made amazing music back then. I remember the first time I heard The Silent Circus and was completely blown away, had never heard anything like that before, and they're still having that impact on me to this day. So there you have it. 18 Visions. I'm going to probably get some hate for this, but they were not a band that I ever really got into. I listened to a ton of metalcore during that period, and for some reason they just never clicked with me. I've gone back several times and just haven't really gotten into them, but I respect that they have a following. They had an impact. I don't have a ton to say about them, really. I don't feel like it's fair to just drop them into D tier just because I am not as familiar with them and not as big a fan of them. But I also don't really think they necessarily belong in the more influential categories. So personally, I'm just going to plop them at a C. The Bled. So these guys are great. First two albums in particular, Past the Flask and Found in the Flood. I think that's the right title. Both amazing albums, some among my favorites. Their third album, and as far as I know, I think that was their final album, was kind of blah, really generic sounding. I was disappointed, and then they sort of just dropped off the face of the earth. So I can't really fairly put them into S or A. They're pretty well respected. Those two albums are really good. I feel like putting them at B is pretty fair. Unearth, the slayer of metalcore, as they've been called. Obviously, huge following. If you've listened to our episode where Dave Raffi and I did the metalcore Big Four, we ultimately placed them in that Big Four. So I feel like it's fair to give them the A. They've had a lot of pretty consistent popular releases. I'm not as big a fan of them. I love The Oncoming Storm. I thought their latest album was kind of generic, but it wasn't bad. It was still, kind of typical metalcore. They've stuck to their guns, thus the moniker. So I think their consistency and their impact and their name recognition warrants an A, but they're not innovative or impressive enough to me to fall into S tier. Glassjaw. This is probably one of those that people are going to argue, are they even really metalcore? But all of my hardcore metalcore fan friends were listening to Glassjaw, obviously Worship and Tribute, And then the album prior to that, which the name escapes me for the moment, were huge. I got to give them some props too, where their new material with their comeback has been fantastic. I think it's among their best work. They've continued to mature. I also like the Coloring Book EP. They've got a very signature sound, very different. They seem to kind of just do whatever they feel like doing. And I got to pay credit where it's due on that one. Personally, I think they deserve the A. I might have put them at B if they had just sort of dropped off after their first albums, but the comeback, I think, has cemented them excuse me, into being worthy of A tier. Poison the Well. I just did a video on these guys recently. I'm not exactly sure when I'm going to put this one up, but obviously it should be clear by now for regular followers of the channel and the site that I'm a huge Poison the Well fan. I call these guys potentially the greatest of all time. And while they don't sport quite the same level of innovation, they really provided the blueprint of what modern metalcore was going to sound like. And I have met very few people where I bring up Poison the Well and they go, oh, they suck. Like, no. If you're into metalcore, chances are you love Poison the Well. They put out very consistent albums. You Come Before You is potentially my favorite album of all time. It's definitely up there. And they were doing things just in a very particular way and tried new things too as they moved into versions and even on the Tropic Rot. And another band that just hasn't put out a bad album, in my opinion, and had a huge impact on the genre. And so for that, I want to put them at S tier. Hopesfall. Another band making a comeback. I loved their new album. It was kind of like my summer jam last year. Very uplifting, fun stuff. I love the Satellite Years too. They are obviously well known. There's a lot of bands right now in that genre that I'm getting requests from to review their new albums, and there's a clear Hopesfall reference point there. Very impactful, very consistent. I actually really love their earlier stuff too, like the EP with like No Wings to Speak Of. Am I even getting that right? I might be mixing that up with something else. They did have kind of a dip where like A-Types is okay. There's some songs on there I really love, but it's inconsistent, and I don't really like the Magnetic North very much at all. So that bumps them down a little bit. I think I need to put them at B tier. Feels about right. Demon Hunter, another band I didn't really get into. I did not like their new double album at all. And I've never been super impressed with them. I've heard some songs where I was like, oh, that's pretty killer, but never enough for me to like really get on board with them. Just kind of one of the middle of the road bands. I give them a C, potentially even a D. Actually, I'm going to put them at D. All That Remains, man, this Darkened Heart, phenomenal. So many great guitar parts, very emotionally impactful. So that album, and then dang it, I forgot to turn my audio off over here. Also, was it The Fall of Ideals? I think I'm blanking on all these names right now, but two just rock solid, incredible monuments in metalcore. But they lose a lot of points for pretty much everything after that. I really enjoyed the newest album. I was actually quite surprised because I have been completely disinterested in them for a long time now. And that album was actually pretty good. But the quality has it's dipped quite a bit. So I feel like their name recognition and importance in the genre needs to be recognized, but they also need to lose a few points for not, always putting out top-notch material. I think I'm going to put them at a B. Avenged Sevenfold, you're probably going to get hate for this one too. I was never a big fan of these guys either. I hopped on that first big album, really enjoyed it, but I was always actually kind of annoyed by M. Shadow's vocals. I was just more into like the straight up screaming stuff and then kind of the singing. I don't really like that kind of yowly scream singing style for the most part. And just sometimes too over the top too. I was also a big Fear and Loathing fan, so when they did the Bat Country video, it just felt like a really embarrassing parody of something that was actually really good. And so, yeah, that personally, I have some problems with them, but I recognize that they are hugely important to the genre. They have a huge fan base. They've been doing something right, and also they're pretty talented musicians and songwriters in a number of respects. So I got to give them credit for that. I feel like B tier is fair. I know some would put them at A, some might even put them at S, but not me personally. It Dies Today, kind of a smaller group, but they've had I've talked to quite a few bands we talk about this album in particular that I've got the artwork for here, the Caitiff Choir, and how influential that was. I own it. It's still on my shelf. Great album, but not really like a higher tier band. Didn't put out a ton of great material after that, and sort of dropped off and disappeared into obscurity. I am going to put them... I'll put them at C. Might lean more towards D, but I enjoy them enough that I don't feel like I'd want to put them all the way at the bottom. Architects is kind of an exception band. They came in later, but I added them to the list just because they are seriously popular. They're probably like one of the most important metalcore bands right now that still kind of play in more of a classic style, although they've taken on plenty of those gent elements as well. Great stuff. Lots of good albums here. Lots of great songwriting, very infectious, and as I've said before, the best blech in the biz. Nobody can beat Sam when it comes to the blech. So yeah, good stuff. I did not like the new album Holy Hell. I thought it was very average to kind of subpar. Thought the vocals were kind of too poppy and sappy, and obviously there were kind of life reasons why that was happening, but it didn't make for an enjoyable album for me. But the two before that, fantastic. And they've had quite a run up to in their discography getting to that point. And they're well known, very influential right now. I think they will continue to be recognized. I'm going to put them at B tier. Man, I got to speed up or this is going to go on forever. I've got a lot of bands to get through here. Norma Jeane, I mean, super consistent. Another band that hasn't put out an album that I disliked. So many great ones, so many great songs, super heavy, infectious, have expanded their sound over time, even with lineup changes, and made a huge impact on multiple genres, really, and became one of kind of the mainstream darlings of the genre. I'm going to put them at A tier. As I Lay Dying, I'm going to go ahead and just put them at S tier. These are another band that we put in our big four. Every album, I guess Shadows Are Security, I've talked about. I don't really like that album, but it's not necessarily a bad album. I just find it a little bit dull, but beyond that, fantastic. Like, amazing songs. They're one of the best known, and there's a reason why that even given what happened with the band, people are still thirsty to have them back because the music was just that good. And you can say what you want about that, but I'm not even going to go there. Musically, really great stuff. August Burns Red, go ahead and put them at A. Man. See, these guys, another very consistent band, haven't put out a bad album. Every one is great. I own them all now. Came to them kind of late in the game, but I've been excited, too, to see how these guys have innovated over the years and really broadened their horizons, tried some more kind of progressive song structures and extra instrumentation, and it's been great to see. I might want to put them at S tier just because they're still killing it now. And whereas like with Norma Jeane, their new albums are good, they're not always great. But I'd say August Burns Red is putting out like the best material of their entire career to this day. So I'm actually gonna put them at S. Botch, again, more of a mathcore group here, but there would be no Norma Jeane without Botch. They even said that Oh God, the Aftermath was basically a tribute to Botch, more or less. I'm going to put them at A tier, not at S tier, only because they don't have a lot of albums. They don't have a lot of material to work with. The material they put out was hugely influential, very popular. They don't quite have the name recognition. I bring up Botch all the time and have people go, "Who the fuck is Botch?" And I'm like, dude, you need to get with it. But yeah, I think A tier is fair because they, whether you knew them or not, you knew them indirectly through the bands that were influenced by them. Atreyu, I'm going to go ahead and make people mad and put them at D tier. They had some catchy stuff, gathered a following, but nothing too exciting there. Like, I mean, to me, it's just more kind of second rate. That's just my personal opinion, and I got to keep moving here. So we're going to leave it at that for them. Trivium, I'm going to put them... This is a tough one. I think I'm going to put them at B tiered. Personally, for me, it's more of a C. I was never a huge Trivium fan, but I liked their first album. I love the song, like Light to the Flies. I remember the first time I heard that song and being amazed by the guitars and liking the vocals and everything. They're another one kind of like an Unearth that have amassed a huge following. And I got to give them credit for being great musicians, but it's just not interesting to me. I feel like there are bands that are just doing it better than they are, so B feels pretty fair. Converge, S tier for sure. Every album, incredible. Just amazing, not only like technically proficient and interesting music, but also emotionally engaging, like so visceral, so raw. I have so many feels, so to speak, when I'm listening to the music, and it's not at all at sacrifice of the technicality of the songwriting. So, man, I could go on all day and just do a video on Converge. I probably will at some point, but I'll leave it at that for now. After the Burial, I'm going to put them at... Man, that's tough. I'm going to put them at B tier. They're amazing. For me personally, it's an A, I think, just because, again, consistency, very talented songwriters, very talented performers. They're among the few, like, just pure, like, they helped to kind of push for the gent sound in the genre. They were one of the early adopters of that, and they do it extremely well. I love Dig Deep too, so they're still putting out quality material to this day, but they don't quite have the like innovative elements or the name recognition necessarily that some of these other groups do, so I'm going to put them at B. Beloved, I'd love to put these guys higher, but they really only have like one album and an EP, but people who were around during the time that all these albums were coming out were talking about Beloved. Like this album Failure On was a big deal, and people were really bummed when it was just a one and done kind of thing. But ultimately, I think I need to put them at C just because it's just the one album. They didn't really stick around so that we could see where that would go in the future. Bleeding Through, I'm going to put a B. Lots of name recognition. I enjoy them personally. I love just they're one of the just more straight up aggressive bands and kind of more of a bro band, I guess you could say, you know, kind of starting that more, not starting necessarily, but really caring for that sort of muscle bound look and style and just kind of I'm gonna beat you up music. And sometimes I want that. So good stuff, good songwriters. I was impressed with how far they were able to take it, and the newer album was actually pretty decent. Their lyrics are though kind of cringy. They don't have those innovative elements that kind of put them into the higher tiers, so I think B is fair. Darkest Hour, I'm gonna put them at A. Lots of name recognition here, lots of consistency, mostly very good albums. They did kind of drop off for a minute, but they came back really strong with the latest one that Kurt Ballou produced. The name is escaping me at the moment. Something about like Flora and yada, yada, yada. It's got like a pink and white kind of cover. Great band, great musicians. I love that they really kind of embrace the sort of Gothenburg-y influences to the guitars, and just all around solid band. I was supposed to see them live, but unfortunately it was during like a massive snowstorm, and they got stuck with their tour bus, so it didn't happen. Haste the Day, D. They had some fun tunes, but not really the reach and influence and quality of these other bands. From Autumn to Ashes, I'm going to put them at B. They've got the name recognition. They were pretty influential. They had 2 really great albums, but particularly Too Bad You're Beautiful. Like, we couldn't talk about metalcore without bringing up that album. It's just incredible stuff. It was an album I listened to over and over and over again, and just was very influential. But after that, they kind of fell apart more or less, and their later albums just didn't have the same quality. I think B is fair. Bullet for My Valentine, another personal one that's going to cause me some hate probably, but personally I put them in D tier. Never got into them, never found their music particularly interesting, and I am kind of upset with them for more or less being part of the starting point for the state of metalcore right now, so that glamcore aesthetic, as I put it. And I could personally do without that, but hey, if you like that, that's perfectly fine. I mean, I enjoy like the easy core stuff and other things that people complain to me for liking, so that's just your bag. This is mine. Shadows Fall, name recognition, some quality stuff, but I just don't feel like they have really the power to reach these higher tiers. I don't really have time to elaborate on that, so I'm going to leave it at that. Parkway Drive, another later band to the game, but I had to include them because people would really scream at me if I didn't. I'm putting them at C tier. I think their music's perfectly decent, perfectly passable, typical metalcore stuff, but very middle of the road. Nothing too exciting about it, nothing to scream home about, and it just feels kind of generic to me. They didn't really have anything new to say. And so honestly, I think we could have never had Parkway Drive and it wouldn't have made a difference. And that may be a mean thing to say, but that's just my personal opinion. Protest the Hero gets A tier for being different, for being amazing songwriters. Again, another very emotionally impactful band, pretty consistent, great progressive influences, great vocals, fun lyrics. I sing along to this stuff like crazy, and their albums are just highly infectious, great stuff. Stray from the Path, another kind of, well, not necessarily, like they didn't gain in popularity kind of till later. Cringy lyrics, as I've talked about, but really infectious musicianship. Again, they've got that sort of Rage Against the Machine fusion going on and sort of the hip-hop elements. And for that, I mean, they're different, but they're starting to do some stuff that's sort of irritating me too. I think I got to put them at C tier ultimately, because I just don't feel like they fit with these B tier groups here. Shai Hulud, another band kind of like Botch that people go, who? Huh? But hugely influential on the scene. Didn't just become as popular. They're more kind of a DIY, kind of supposed to remain underground sort of thing. Definitely more kind of like hardcore influence as well. But it's just another one of those things where the hardcore fans, like, who know Shai Hulud will be mad if they're not included here because they were kind of foundational, but they don't have the name recognition as some of these other bands. So I think I need to put them. They also don't have the consistency. I mean, personally, even though it's going to probably make some OG listeners mad, I'm going to put them at C. Remembering Never had this one incredible album that I absolutely loved and not a lot of people remember, called Women and Children Die First, but that was pretty much it. They had another album after that, dropped off the face of the earth, did a comeback album, and none of it was particularly as exciting as their old stuff. And as much as I love that album, I think I need to put them at D tier for all those reasons. Every Time I Die, man, is it A or S? I'm going to put S just because they were one of a kind. They were doing their own thing. It was completely just different. I love the lyrics. I love the musicianship. I love how they kind of infused that southern rock stuff into it that was unexpected and totally confused me at the beginning. They've been very consistent. All their albums are really good. I have been irritated with Keith Buckley over a few issues, but nothing musically, really. Like, as a musician, I love everything he does in terms of what he brings to the recordings. Great band. The Chariot, I'm putting at A tier. Very consistent. Great offshoot from Norma Jeane. Obviously, we've got the original Norma Jeane vocalist on this project, and he just killed it. Raw, aggressive energy, amazing. So just great. Like, awesome stuff. Yeah, there you go. I'm just kind of rambling on trying to get through this now. Dillinger Escape Plan, they've got to be S. Unmatched musicianship, unmatched live show, unmatched innovation, and just willingness to go in directions that other people might not have, and huge influence on the scene. Like, even non-metal fans will recognize that name, even if they haven't necessarily heard the music. Just incredible. What a legacy. I'm actually glad that they hung it up at the top of their game, and people are going to remember them forever. Under Oath, I'm putting at A tier. Of the more melodic, kind of poppier side of metalcore, these guys had it just perfect, I think. Alongside maybe Hopesfall, but I think they did it better. They had this great balance of the aggression with the softer parts. It's almost like pre-easycore, because they weren't like truly trying to necessarily combine pop punk with metalcore and breakdowns, and they don't really even do the breakdown piece. But I feel like this is an influence on some of those later bands, like A Day to Remember, which I know I didn't include on here, but that's a conversation for another day. I got to get through this. Killswitch Engage, I'm going to put them at A tier. Name recognition, great songs, several great albums. A little inconsistent, though. I feel like later into their career, things got kind of not so great for them. The lyrics aren't that great. They're not really doing anything necessarily sort of new and exciting, but they were a front runner. They were highly influential, still are. And there's a lot of stuff I really like about them. I just don't think that they've met that kind of perfection of S tier. Walls of Jericho, influential, good, an important part of the early scene, I think, but not as influential as these other bands, and largely not forgotten, but like you don't hear a lot of bands like listing them in their top influences, and I don't necessarily feel like they were really bringing anything new. We could get into the fact that there weren't a lot of female-fronted metalcore projects at the time, but I mean, given all the flack I get about even bringing that up, it seems unfair to use that as a means to climb them up into a higher tier either. So do with that what you will. And then finally, we've got Zao, who are another all these bands are coming back, man. And they're putting out quality material too. They were very influential, big part of the community. Good songs. I never was like a massive fan of them. I'm going to put them at B tier. I think they fit right in the middle there. Yeah, and that'll do it. I've gone way over time here. I'm not even sure how long this recording is now, but that is my tier of the metalcore, classic metalcore bands, we'll put it. And let me know what you think in the comments. Again, I will link the tier template down there so you can make your own. You can respond with your own thoughts about how my opinion is garbage and all that fun stuff. But please do stick around and also watch these plenty of other videos on the channel. Please do subscribe, hit up our Patreon, find us on social media, all that jazz. But for now, this is Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.